Someone I want to see.
My friend Sherlock Holmes.
221B Baker Street.
Hello there. Welcome to my review of The Return of Sherlock Holmes, and the final episode of this series is a big one, with Jeremy Brett and Edward Hardwicke and the creative team taking on the Hound of the Baskervilles, perhaps the most famous Sherlock Holmes story, and one that will be covered by me a few more times before I'm done with Sherlock Holmes adaptations. For that reason, I won't be going scene by scene for this special extended episode. Instead, I'll give you a synopsis, then talk about the adaptation as a whole. So, here we go. Dr. James Mortimer engages the services of Holmes and Watson after the somewhat unusual death of his patient and friend, Sir Charles Baskerville. He reveals the family is subject to an ancient curse after ancestor Hugo Baskerville was killed by a hellhound while attempting to have his wicked way with a local girl. When Mortimer investigated the scene of Sir Charles' death, he discovered the footprints of a huge dog, and with the next heir to the name, Sir Henry, arriving imminently from Canada, Mortimer fears for his life. Holmes dismisses the curse.
Yes, well, if you believe this to be supernatural, you'll find more help from a priest.
But meets with Henry and asks Watson to accompany him and Dr. Mortimer to Baskerville Hall in Dartmoor, while he remains in London. After arriving in Dartmoor, the trio are informed about an escaped convict from Dartmoor Prison that is currently on the loose.
Ain't seen no sign of him. Farmers don't like it.
Who is he?
Selden, the Notting Hill murderer.
And they also meet the Barrymores, husband and wife, butler and housekeeper for Baskerville Hall. A series of strange events and people then follow, including the unusual brother and sister, the Stapletons, neighbour Frankland and his estranged daughter Laura, and a mystery man hiding on a tour on the moor. This mystery man is eventually revealed to be Sherlock Holmes, who has been in Dartmoor almost as long as Watson, investigating in secret, and who may have gathered all the answers as a life and death struggle for survival ensues. I won't spoil the rest of the story on the off chance you haven't seen one of the many adaptations. But the first thing of note about this version is how well it fits in with the rest of the Jeremy Brett series. While the budget was certainly higher than a normal episode, it doesn't attempt to be overly flashy or stray too far from the style and tone that the rest of the series has set up. Instead, just widening the scope and scale just enough to feel richer in depth than a normal episode, with a larger cast and additional shots that would have otherwise been cut for time and cost. These additions go largely unnoticed on first viewing, and it's only on repeat viewings that they begin to stand out. One thing that does stand out with the extra time given to scenes is how intentionally quiet it is. Much more time is given to establishing an atmosphere of unease, sold through the expressions on the actors' faces and the eerie stillness of almost every scene. It means that when Holmes says he is concerned, we really believe him.
No.
This is not something I would want in every episode, but it really lends itself to this almost supernatural story. One noticeable example of this atmosphere is when Watson goes to the post office to send one of his updates to Holmes. When he leaves, the postmistress takes the letters and hides them in her desk, only to give them to a shadowy figure who comes to the post office sometime later. Apparently all part of some greater wicked conspiracy. Of course, we later find out that this is Holmes picking up his mail as prearranged with the perfectly harmless postmistress, but in the moment it feels like there is more at work here than a simple folktale. The cast too do a superb job throughout. The temptation might be to stunt cast some big names in a big story like this, but again the show sticks to its roots and instead casts some fantastic character actors who completely convince. Fiona Gillis as Beryl Stapleton is a particular highlight in a difficultly nuanced role.
Miss Stapleton?
Get away from this place at all costs! Do you see that orchid?
As is, for different reasons, Bernard Horsfall as Frankland, providing some ebullient levity to the proceedings.
I have established a right-of-way slap through the middle of old Middleton's Park.
The only weak performance is Ronald Pickup's beard, which is obviously false and does distract in every scene it appears. There's a wonderfully acted moment where Henry, played by Christopher Tabori, is dressed down by James Faulkner's Stapleton when he interrupts a rendezvous between Beryl and Henry. As Henry walks away, alone and dejected, he plays it partly like a child having been scolded, and partly like a man who wishes he had fought back. It feels like a very real reaction. While the bulk of the first half of the story is Holmesless, it makes up for this by cutting to him every so often as he continues his own investigation, never giving away that he is not solely in London, but instead moving between London and Dartmoor. Obviously, this is less of an issue in the novel where Holmes and Watson keep communications open via letters, but it is a problem in screen adaptations, which for the most part usually reintroduce Sherlock much earlier into the story, but here it remains reasonably faithful to the book in that respect. So this is a reasonable compromise that just about works. It also, though, really allows Watson to shine, something he doesn't often get the chance to do in the adapted stories where we lack his author's voice. The reunion between Holmes and Watson is particularly joyous, as Sherlock is his usual dry self.
When I see a cigarette stub marked Bradley, Oxford Street, I know my friend Watson is in the neighbourhood.
And Watson is unimpressed with the deception and his cooking skills.
I've deserved better at your hands, Holmes. You use me and do not trust me.
Please, Watson.
It's quite disgusting, Holmes.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Although both are clearly excited to be reunited. I think it's also worth mentioning that in the novel, Lestrade accompanies them for the climax of the story, but here his role is replaced by that of Dr. Mortimer, which I actually think works better, as it doesn't really make sense for Lestrade to turn up so far from London for no real reason. As the episode draws to a close and all the secrets and mysteries are explained and explored, the only thing left worth mentioning is the Hound itself. Which has so far only made a brief glancing appearance in the prologue, and that is probably for the best, as, like in every version of this story that I've seen, it doesn't really convince. The single weakness that runs like a bold thread through every single adaptation of this story is that the Hound always looks like what it is, a big dog. It's a case where the imagined version from the written words delivers far more than seeing the real thing ever could. With the advent of CGI, maybe a modern adaptation could beat this curse and make the creature look more frightening, but as the Hound has to turn out to actually be a big dog disguised as a supernatural beast, this may also not be the case. They wisely show as little of the dog as possible here, which is for the best, but what little we do see doesn't really give off the menace it was intended to elicit. But as I said, this is not a problem with the show in particular, but with any adaptation of this story. This is still a very fine adaptation, and a fitting conclusion to the return of Sherlock Holmes. There's far less Jeremy Brett than usual, but what we do get is perfect for the story, and his performance is a real highlight. Edward Hardwicke really gets a chance to shine as the star of the episode, and it's a beautifully told version of the story that sticks to the novel where it needs to, and deviates where it needs to, for the screen. Everyone involved here really delivered a top-notch episode, and so it has to be a 5 out of 5 for me. Thank you. Goodbye.